In 1989 and earned his Ph.D. at Harvard Divinity School. His research and teaching focuses on religion in the Near East and Mediterranean. He has edited and co-authored 7 scholarly books and numerous articles. The research he has undertaken has allowed him to travel extensively throughout Greece to study religious archaeological sites, focusing on Samothrace Island. Perhaps most importantly, he served as the faculty advisor for KU Soma, the predecessor to the Secular Jayhawks. I am delighted to hear his presentation today, The Anti-Reason Impulse in American Culture. Please welcome Dr. Paul Mirecki to the stage.
Thanks, Jacob. Good to see you. Thanks for coming out. In this talk, I would like to engage you in considering several issues dealing with what I call the anti-reason impulse in American culture. You will immediately recognize this as a pressing current issue in our public political discourse in relation to allegations of fake news, accompanied by the promotion of alternative facts, in what we can call post-truth politics, giving rise to fact-checking. I will review, describe, adopt, and engage 2 influential studies by expert historians dealing on anti-intellectualism or anti-reason, and also ignorance as a virtue, as we see more and more in our society, and the attack on educated experts. I'm also indebted to related commentaries published by Lydia Lyle Gibson of Harvard Magazine, Robinson Meyer of The Atlantic, Will Orimus of Slate, and Professor Brian Cox of the University of Manchester. In considering the historic tension between access to education and excellence in education, those 2 things, Richard Hofstadter, professor of American history at Columbia University, until his death in 1970, argued that both anti-intellectualism and utilitarianism, which I call vocationalism, were unexpected, unfortunate consequences of what he called the democratization of education. So he's looking at this issue. What happens when higher education is available to everyone? Moreover, he presented evidence that the themes of anti-intellectualism and vocationalism are historically embedded in America's national fabric, an outcome of America's colonial European and evangelical Protestant heritage. Anti-intellectualism and vocationalism were thus the results of our cultural heritage, not the result of our democratic system of government. This move toward anti-intellectualism and vocationalism in education posed a threat to the understanding of the purpose of the university and the social function and value of the intellectual. Concerning the university, it classically provided a crucial intellectual system of checks and balances in modern civilized society. The university was the only institution wholly committed to the values of inquiry, integrity, open discussion, rationality, and freedom. Universities functioned as citadels of intellectual individualism, communities devoted to research and criticism governed by the ideal of academic freedom. The very possibility of civilized public discourse rests upon the willingness of people to consider that they may be mistaken about their sincerely held core beliefs, and the university provides them with such an understanding. In addition, the modern free university rests upon the willingness of the larger society to support and sustain the university, whose business it is, again, to examine critically and responsibly the assumptions which prevail in that society. So Hofstadter's view that the democratization of knowledge led to narrow vocationalism in education directly challenged the previous progressive notions of the inherent value of universal education. So progressives were saying higher education is always going to benefit the individual and society. Hofstadter is saying let's pull back and let's look at this carefully. So his interest in the consequences of the democratization of knowledge instead revealed in the American public a regression, a widespread ignorance of what higher education is and can be, and more importantly, how it developed from the Renaissance through the Enlightenment and into the more recent modern period, and of what it tries to accomplish. Hofstadter argued that Americans failed to recognize and understand higher education in terms of its positive reciprocal relationship with society. So that link was broken. Specifically, its long history of what higher education has meant to American society and what American society has already done to promote higher education. Here, Hofstadter first illustrated the powerful influence of vocationalism in defining and directing higher education away from the liberal arts and the more important pursuit of factual, accurate, and reliable information. He made it clear that while a liberal arts education would not necessarily create an individual, a vocational education certainly could not, due to its admittedly narrow utilitarian focus. Just let me say that's the closest I get to making a joke in this talk, so you got to catch them while they go by. The demands of utilitarianism and political and social egalitarianism required that higher education be available to everyone, and that it would result in the utilitarian business ideal of vocational employment, hence the well-known business model recently adopted by universities. He identified such ideals as the major causes of anti-intellectualism in society, mediocrity in our public schools, the reluctance of public officials to finance education, all accompanied by attacks on academic freedom in the universities. Hofstadter accused religion, especially Protestant evangelicalism and conservative politicians, of fostering among people a resentment and suspicion of the intellect, of the life of the mind, and of those experts who devote their lives to it. He specifically charged that local evangelical preachers and small-town lawyers and businessmen masked their bias against intellect through the rhetoric of sanctimonious moralizing and deliberate misunderstandings of freedom of speech and egalitarianism. And this is, I think, an important point he makes, deliberate misunderstanding of freedom of speech, which I'll get into. A good example of misguided egalitarianism is the oft-heard non sequitur statement, which says in effect, quote, "Everyone has a voice, so my uninformed opinion is as correct as your tested scientific knowledge." We hear this attitude every day coming through the media. But equal rights, such as freedom of speech, does not mean that all the ideas people speak are equally valid and useful. It just means they are free to speak. What we see is a manic reinterpretation of democracy in which everyone must have their say and not be disrespected. A therapeutic culture where the ultimate human value is high self-esteem, not achievement. In defining intellect in terms of the critical, creative, and contemplative side of the mind that examines, ponders, theorizes, criticizes, imagines, and evaluates and understands the meaning of situations as a whole, Hofstadter clearly differentiated such an intellect from what he calls mere intelligence. Intelligence he viewed as an excellence of mind within a fairly narrow, immediate, and predictable range that is manipulative and unfailingly practical and vocational, seeking to seize the immediate meaning of a situation and evaluate it in its limited and detailed context. In these definitions, Hofstadter showed his preference for intellect over mere intelligence. He understood intellect as a unique feature of human beings, but intelligence as a common quality demonstrated by both humans and animals. The role of both intellect and intelligence in society interested him because he came to recognize the transformation of intellect into the inferior nature of narrow intelligence, not only as an historic and current trend, but as a destructive and dangerous form of the anti-reason impulse in society. To give an example, our president obviously has high intelligence in the narrow field of big city real estate, undoubtedly. But concerning his intellect, in the broader and larger issues of life, personal relationships, national and international politics and business, he's just not very bright. Second point, ignorance as a virtue and the attack on educated, experienced experts. Richard Hofstadter also recognized the increasing complexity of modern life that set the social conditions for the popular rejection of experts, a subject recently analyzed by Tom Nichols in his 2017 bestseller, The Death of Expertise, which I highly recommend. It is obvious that the average person cannot function effectively in modern society without all sorts of experts, yet resentment has risen against experts. We see this clearly in the rise of campaigns against established knowledge, such as the anti-vaccine movement, and deniers of all sorts. We have noticed in the conservative media how the word professor is often used as a pejorative term and expressed with a tone of voice that suggests ridicule and condescension toward experts. Well, professor, that's your opinion. With the rise of social media platforms, anyone can achieve the same platform as an educated, experienced expert. For example, in social policy, medical procedures, and automobile safety standards. So, what are experts? Obviously, experts are people who know considerably more about a given subject than the rest of us, myself included, and to whom we usually turn to for education and advice. They are an authoritative minority who does not know everything and is not always correct, but their views on any given topic are more likely to be correct than those of the public at large. Your doctor is more likely to know why you have a pain in your side than you do. So, how do we identify experts and non-experts? Experts can be identified by their certifications and credentials which indicate they have been tested, often at the PhD level, but not always, that they have been peer-reviewed and have thus attained a recognized and verified basic standard of competence. Experts are also members of a broad community of other specialists devoted to a greater understanding of their subject. Over my career, like most professors, I have been a member of several national and international academic research societies, and was even honored with lifetime membership in one of them. Watch out for whitewashed certifications and credentials. Experts begin with raw data, with evidence, and tested with appropriate methods and appropriate experiments, as is typical of the scientific method, whether in the humanities, the social sciences, or the hard sciences. Most people are unaware that scholarly articles and books are subjected to peer review. They're not just willy-nilly published by fantasy publishers. The peers are anonymous experts in the same field, working unpaid for the professor or for the publisher, working for the publisher, who has received a manuscript of a book by an author. And these anonymous experts review the material and guarantee that the ideas promoted in the article or book meet at least a minimal level of competence, and in most cases, a high level of competence. That may be what the requirement by the publisher is. But if not, the peer reviews recommend the study be rejected and not published. So there's a peer review process of elimination. Nearly all of my publications have been peer-reviewed, and I've been an anonymous peer reviewer for many scholarly articles and books, as pretty much all professors have been. As a result, I have recommended publishing some, but rejecting others. And it's not a matter of being nice. Everyone's anonymous. You get a book manuscript from a publisher or an article manuscript, there's no name on it. You don't know who wrote it. You might have some idea because they're in your field. You might recognize something about the way they're speaking, but that's a guess on your part. And then you as a peer reviewer are also anonymous. They don't know who is reviewing. Only the publisher knows, and that information is kept with them. So as a result, I have recommended publishing some but rejecting others. And as I said, it's not a matter of being nice, but being brutally honest for what can allowed to pass as knowledge and for who consequently can be considered a reliable expert. Plus, you don't want to publish a book that hasn't been peer-reviewed, because you don't want it to be peer-reviewed in the press. And you don't want bad press. So you want to get all the negative feedback you can get from the peer reviewers. Make the corrections, rewrite things, then submit it again with the corrections having been made. Experts can do their best to serve their clients, respect their own knowledge, boundaries, and limits, and demand their boundaries be respected by others as part of their service to society. So experts need to make clear to everyone what's going on, why their idea can be considered as important. They've done the background work, they have the experience. Experts need to be clear about why it is they have expert knowledge that is worthy of consideration, yet at the same time need to respect non-experts with a sense of service to them, without, of course, even a trace of condescension. Experts and experts simply need to get along, exhibit mutual respect and trust. And it's the trust issue which, of course, is the problem. We all know that experts can make mistakes. You see this in the headlines every day. But experts have a pretty good batting average compared to non-experts. The scientific method is an effective process used to arrive at reliable and tested knowledge. It's called theory, one of the most misunderstood terms in America today, the word theory. Most scientific experiments fail. That's just the nature of science. It has to be that way. That's how science operates. So a hypothesis is created by competent experts. What's a hypothesis? It's a statement that's an educated guess. And I emphasize it's an educated guess. On the basis of an observable phenomenon, something they're observing. An appropriate experiment is run by competent observers to test the hypothesis, and if it results in failure, the experts go back one or two steps and adjust the hypothesis and/or the experiment. And when it results in success, their hypothesis passes the test and is thus correct, with success leading to theory, best called theoretical knowledge, the highest form of knowledge available to humans. It's just a theory. Well, there's no such thing as just a theory. At the beginning of every semester, and for every religious studies course I teach at the university, my first lecture is on the scientific method. And it's amazing how many students tell me afterward they have never had a lecture on the scientific method. It's never been explained. And they're surprised that their first has been a religious studies course, of all things. And then when they ask, well, how is the scientific method going to be applied to religious studies? My response is, just wait. We've got a semester ahead of us. We'll be looking at data. We'll be testing it. A lack of understanding of what science is and how it has helped the human race is rampant in our culture. Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker, in his latest book, Enlightenment Now, 2018, great title for a book, Enlightenment Now, states that current anti-science rhetoric tries to limit science to the material and technological realms, and thereby makes science irrelevant to ethics, public policy, values, and culture at large. Yes, science has resulted in social evils, but in such cases it needs to be recognized that the problem is not with science, but with its irresponsible or unethical use. The best control against the improper use of science is secular humanism, which has the goal, according to Pinker, of maximizing human flourishing, life, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, and richness of the life experience, thus promoting a non-authoritarian, non-supernatural basis for meaning and ethics, truly promoting good without belief in an outsider alien God who appears on a mountaintop. But experts can fail by moving out of their area of expertise and taking on the risk of making inaccurate statements or questionable actions based on faulty conclusions. Unfortunately, the mistakes get more media attention than the successes. And after mistakes have occurred, the responsible corrections usually go unnoticed. Experts can instead recognize their own limits and failures, understand why they have limits, and why they can fail, and then move on. Lay people can educate themselves on the difference between such errors by experts and, on the other hand, errors by experts through incompetence, corruption, and even fraud. So I'm not letting experts off the hook easily here. They are right in holding such dishonest experts legally liable if warranted. The engineers and/or builders of the bridge that collapsed at Florida International University just a few weeks ago on March 15th appear to have been incompetent. It didn't just happen. Someone was not doing their job. There was a review going on. They saw cracks in the concrete, and they just kept talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. It didn't just happen. Lay people need an attitude toward experts that is a healthy combination of skepticism and humility. In other words, we each need to make sure our doctor is actually a fully accredited and experienced MD. That's our responsibility. Basically, the rejection of experts is a rejection of science and rationality, the foundations of Western civilization. But we also see the dangerous idea that our rich and complex society is currently functioning very well, and it is not because of the contribution of experts in countless areas of knowledge and skill who have built up the infrastructure of our society, but it is functioning well because it just does so on its own. It all happens magically. So experts in public health, child care development, and social policy are not needed. Society functions well because an imaginary friend or unmoved mover, has decided to bless us with his magical world of safety and 21st century American creature comforts. But in reality, our society is functioning well because of competent, responsible intellectuals and experts. Because of experts employing reason and the scientific method, smallpox has been eradicated. We have cell phones that actually operate. Clean drinking water comes out of our kitchen faucets. It doesn't just happen. The electric grid is continually on. Someone's doing it. The internet is always up. Grocery stores are full of foods that are safe to eat. It's amazing. You go into any of our grocery stores in town, and food is literally falling off the shelves. You see food on the floor. Everything's full. It's just overflowing. It's not accidental. Doctors and pharmacists help with our physical and psychological problems. Police and law courts operate effectively. Highways are in good repair. Many thousands of jet airplanes take off and land safely in the dark on a daily basis. This large building we are in does not unexpectedly collapse. Gasoline is always available at the corner gas station. Pizzas are actually delivered. Infant mortality is rare. We have civil rights for those not in the minority. Our toilets actually flush, etc., etc., etc. This is all due to experts who employ reason and the scientific method. It cannot exist without them. It does not just happen because an invisible friend is watching over us. The days of ignorance as a virtue are upon us, but the mental position which states, "I don't know, but I've been told," needs to be abandoned. Great lyrics for a blues song, but not basis for society. Let's look at some of the problems of what I call opinionated pop experts, or non-experts. First, some common psychological features. Confirmation bias. The tendency to look for and find information that supports what one already believes. It is a systemic error of inductive reasoning. The effect is stronger for emotionally charged issues such as politics, religion, life and death issues, gender and sex. Confirmation bias is related to what psychologists call epiphania, which is the tendency to imagine connections between things that are actually not connected, a tendency identifiable in the early stages of schizophrenia. Unfortunately, many people simply dismiss or are not aware of the peer review process in science that ideally protects science against confirmation bias. This is something the peer reviewers look for, confirmation bias in the researcher. Are you doing research to find what you know is already there? It's a big problem in research. We all need to be aware of that we have a tendency to do that. So peer reviewers call out the bias. But outside of academia's peer review process, especially in politically charged media outlets, arguments and debates have no responsible peer review process, and so go unchallenged, as in much of talk radio, Twitter tweets, and opinionated internet blogs. Another common psychological feature is something many of you have heard of, the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a type of cognitive bias in which the less skilled or less competent someone is, the more confident they are that they are correct, and so will dismiss refutations based on accurate knowledge compiled by experts. Let me repeat that. a type of cognitive bias in which the less skilled or less competent someone is, the more confident they are that they are correct. To state it in crude terms, the dumber you are, the more convinced you are that you are not actually dumb. We see this in Garrison Keillor's fictional town of Lake Wobegon, where the parents believe, all the children are above average. They suffer from an illusion of superiority and are unable to recognize their own ineptitude due to the absence of what we can call metacognition, an objective reflection on one's own thought processes. But the Dunning-Kruger effect is a double-edged sword, experts, as high-ability people can wrongly assume that tasks easy for them are also easy for others, or that everyone has the same basic understanding of subjects in which they themselves are experts. It's something we professors deal with all the time. We lecture on a topic over and over again, and our students don't get the point. And we soon realize it's not their problem, it's our problem. We're not communicating properly. So it's a Dunning-Kruger effect, double-edged sword, where we can assume that everyone has the same basic understanding, is starting on the same platform we are in terms of a logical, following a logical argument. Now, there are two types of popular non-experts that we see repeatedly in our media. First, conspiracy theorists. Due to the immensely complicated world we live in, a conspiracy theory, which is really just an untestable hypothesis, is a psychological cushion that provides a deceptive sense of meaning for frightening events that are not easily understood. Some well-known conspiracy theories developed around the 1963 assassination of President Kennedy, the 1969 moon landing, and the disaster of 9/11. Conspiracy theories are unfalsifiable because they provide no evidence, and experts who contradict them are oddly seen as evidence of the conspiracy. This, of course, is tied to political beliefs, which in turn are closely tied to one's self-identity. So any disconfirmation of one's beliefs is taken as a personal attack, and so is resisted. Conspiracies are similar to mythologies, about which Richard Dawkins has said, quote, "Where there is an absence or denial of reliable and testable evidence, there is also a perfect breeding ground for fantasy, myth, legend, and story." And we can add a perfect breeding ground for conspiracy theories. Then we have deniers. Deniers deny something despite the evidential database that has been tested and resulted in accurate knowledge, so that the something denied, in fact, cannot be reasonably and honestly denied because it has been proven to exist or not exist. It has been proven to have happened or not have happened. Deniers deny the clear and testable evidential data, and this is the crucial point, they have no testable contrary evidential data to put forward to the scientific community for peer review. They only have their empty opinion that they deny something. Their claim that some part of our assured accurate knowledge of the cosmos, such as biological evolution, is just a theory. You hear this all the time. Well, that's just a theory, or no one was there to see it. When they use the term just a theory, this is clear evidence that they don't understand what science is and how it operates. One cannot use the word just and the word theory juxtaposed in the phrase that way without demonstrating they do not understand what a scientific theory is. Theoretical knowledge is the highest form of knowledge available to humans. It's not just. What they mean is it's just a hypothesis. Okay, they got the words mixed up. They got the steps of the scientific method out of order. But it's not just a hypothesis, because the data has been tested. The driving engine, as we know, one driving engine for all this is internet access, unlimited information and opinions. The internet allows access to unlimited opinions without facts. Apart from its many obvious benefits to human life, internet access is crucial for intellectuals and experts who are trained in a field and know how to find authentic relevant data and information. Yes, even on Wikipedia and through Google searches, to sort through it, analyze it, and apply it. We do not need to use the internet to gather countless opinions on a known fact. For example, we don't need to debate whether the number 10 is greater than the number 6, and whether you deny that or you think there's a conspiracy that's making that so, or whether the universe is 14 billion years old or 6,000 years old, or whether the polio vaccine is a good thing. The internet's 24-hour news cycle, with its pressure on journalists to shock, entertain, and sell, leaves us emotionally exhausted and confused rather than informed. I get up every morning, I make a pot of coffee, I pour my cup of coffee, I turn on my laptop, I click on either CNN or BBC, and I just go, oh no, what's next? What's the later Twitter storm been? I'm exhausted, I'm tired of it. I want some positive news. So the result is a chaos of news jumbled with indefensible ideas promoted in public discussion by loud, opinionated non-experts who believe something will become fact if it is endlessly repeated. Social media platforms like Facebook are also media outlets adding to the problem. Facebook's algorithms customize content it assumes the user is interested in and agrees with based on the user's history. The algorithm then directs more of the same or similar content back to the user, leading to a greater separation of the user from opposing points of view. So the user is in an isolated situation where most incoming content confirms the user's biases and interests. When I use YouTube, I occasionally search with crazy random words and unusual topics in order to do my best to trick the algorithm, or at least that's what I think I'm doing. And it responds. It responds with those crazy things. It sends me all kinds of links and pop-ups to the crazy things I typed in because it thinks I'm interested in them and wants to put me into that new box it's discovering about me. So, some suggestions in regard to experts. First, we recognize an expert is not always right. We cannot assume that. All things must be tested, and every individual has the responsibility. Secondly, an expert is more likely to be correct than a non-expert, especially on subjects of which we might be uninformed. Experts are the result of education and relevant experience, and these two work together very closely. They make the mark of a true expert. If we lack the education and/or the experience concerning the subject under discussion, we might want to reconsider exactly what it is we're bringing to a discussion and an argument if we lack the education and the experience in it. A Google search does not substitute for decades of research, experience, and peer review. In any discussion, we ourselves need a baseline of relevant competence. Having a strong opinion about something is not the same as knowing something. Finally, everyone's political opinion has value. That's what a democracy is about. But in areas of politics where you or I are not fully informed, our political analysis is certainly not as good as we may think. Thank you. I guess I'm supposed to stand up here and field questions. So go for it. Yeah.
Please wait for the mic.
So when you were talking about Hofstadter, he said that democratization of education was a cause of the anti-intellectualism. I didn't catch the connection. We had anti-intellectualism before, we had it after. Where's the cause and effect?
He's going back also to the 1800s, the pre-Civil War period, and going right up to his day. I think his book was first published in '63. What he finds in his research is that as higher education is becoming more available, there is a process of higher education itself is changing. And it's what we may call, and he didn't use this term, but we might call it dumbing down. Myself, I think it's natural. I wouldn't call it a dumbing down. I think that you're naturally going to be getting responses from the general populace that you're teaching. And they are going to give you feedback on how you adjust and change your ideas and your manner of teaching. And some things are simply not going to be relevant. You're not going to be able to communicate some things because they are too detailed. Maybe they're for PhD students, not college students. So not everything can be discussed that the expert would want to teach. I have this problem in putting together a syllabus for a class. If it's a 100-level course syllabus, I know that I can't talk about the distinctions between classical Greek and Hellenistic Roman period Greek. The New Testament written in the latter. Because it's beyond the understanding of the students. Half of them are not going to know where Greece is on the map. And if I talk about Greece, some of them are going to think it's something at the bottom of a frying pan. And I understand that. So I don't know if I'm getting to your question, but if you check in his book, he's done his research and he has his studies there. He's a scholar of American history.
It just seems kind of elitist to me. Reaction I have.
Well, I think he was surprised. I think he was surprised by what he found. It does sound elitist, but it's what a good objective study of the data produces. That there is then an anger toward intellectuals. The university has to change. I mean, look at universities around the country, including KU, have moved to the business model. Students are customers. And I sense in the last 5 years, in conversations with my colleagues, that some students say, well, I paid for this class, I should be getting an A. No. We rate you. You grade yourself, but we rate you and we have to rate you. If you're absent 20% of the time, if you're late 50% of the time, you're missing all kinds of stuff. And the state of Kansas is going to verify to a future employer, this person is reliable, they earned a Bachelor of Science degree. It's a problem. Rather than achievement, there's an emphasis on self-esteem. And it affects and it influences the quality of education. I have so many students, and it's a minority, but so many students who want me to give them a break. Oh, I missed my bus. Sorry, I'm 20 minutes late. You've used that excuse 6 times this semester. You come into class, you've missed all the introductions, you've missed the announcements. I'm in the middle of the lecture, and you walk in, and you've missed so much. Why don't you just catch the earlier bus? That's what I do every morning. I catch the bus that will get me there ahead of time, not, splitting hairs. So anyway. Yeah. Go ahead, whoever.
Can you just talk a little bit more about how you include the scientific method in your lectures and religious studies classes? You mentioned talking about it at the beginning and then letting them know it was going to be
prominent. It depends on what topic is being presented. To begin with, we have certain, call them foundational premises of our knowledge about how society operates, how humans function psychologically. And when we see things in Holy Scriptures, the Bible or others, giving us stories about things that just don't cohere with our knowledge of reality. A 24-hour eclipse, for example, in the Bible, or a virgin birth, where Jesus ascends up bodily into the sky and is still there bodily. He doesn't turn into like a spirit, like beam me up, Scotty, and he disappears. He's still up there physically. And where, I don't know. So there are certain foundational premises to our knowledge that we have that we can begin to recognize. There are problems with a lot of things held by religious belief. One important issue is how scriptures originate and pass through culture over time. Say with the history of the Bible, you have handwritten manuscripts. Some of them are selected to be copied, and copies are made and they circulate. So right now we're in, say, the 2nd century, 3rd century. They're being copied by scribes who are believers. We have the copies they made. The earliest copy of a New Testament manuscript we have dates to the year 125. It's about the size of a credit card. It's just a little fragment from a book. But by the time we get into the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, we have many, many manuscripts. That is hard factual data. That right there is the basis for scientific method. We can look at those texts. That is, we can study the traces of ink on those papyrus and vellum sheets and find misspellings, find all kinds of errors, all kinds of juxtapositions of paragraphs, all kinds of changes to the text that have been made by scribes because they read something in the Bible and they think, Jesus couldn't have said that, I'm going to change it. And they change it. And then someone comes along 100 years later, uses their Bible, their manuscript, as the exemplar from which they're going to make a dozen copies. And then those copies are copied a dozen times each, and they're sent all around Europe. And the problem proliferates. By the time we get to, the end of the Enlightenment period, scholars have worked through most of this. And there are thousands upon thousands of what we call textual variants in biblical texts. In some cases, there are words we have no idea what they mean. I mean, imagine that if you think the Bible is the Word of God. There are many words that cannot be translated in Hebrew or Greek. I'll give you one example. Give us this day our daily bread. The word daily there is a guess. It's not the word daily, and it doesn't mean daily, whatever it means. But the translators have to put in some words, so they flip a coin and they guess. And I've been a student of some of these scholars on these translation teams of Bibles you buy in the store. And they admit to having flipped coins to make decisions on what reading to accept. So that's just one example of how scientific method can be applied to religious studies. Probably one of the most crucial controls over religious studies is archaeology. In Joshua chapter 10, the Israelite army surround the city of Jericho. And it's a walled city, you know, an ancient Near Eastern walled city. And they destroy the walls by blowing their trumpets. Okay, it doesn't fit with our knowledge of how reality is, that you're going to destroy these huge walls by blowing trumpets. It just doesn't work. But secondly, archaeologists have shown that in Joshua's day, okay, so he's the general who's leading this attack on Jericho. On Joshua's day, the city was abandoned. It was no longer functioning as a city. There was no one there at that time. So what's the purpose of the story in Joshua chapter 10? Political propaganda. Oh no, don't tell me there's political propaganda in the Bible. It's full of it. They're people. They weren't any different than us. Archeology, very important in biblical studies, any kind of cultural studies. Yeah.
What effect do you think the extreme disagreement in the political sphere about effective policy choices has on our trust of expert opinion? Because it seems as though politicians at odds with one another present differing experts to support differing policy choices.
Or no experts at all.
Or none. Sometimes they're
They elect to their cabinet people who are not experts. No, but go ahead and continue. Okay. I really think of it in terms of all of this fake news, alternative facts. I was born in 1950. To me, I can kind of see where this is coming from, and I recognize it. I'm concerned about middle schoolers and high schoolers who are growing up with this as their reality. So I don't know where it's going, but I don't think we'll be able to turn the ship around on a dime. I think it's going to take a long time, and the results are going to be pretty disastrous for our culture. Young people who are of the attitude that, oh, your opinion and my opinion, what's the difference? And what the after effect of that will be in their lives. And I have no idea where that would go, but I think that's a bigger issue. I don't think that it was handled quite enough by Tom Nichols in his book on the attack on experts. He doesn't really get into that issue on what effect this is going to have 20, 30 years from now. We can see the effect it's having now. It's pretty clear. of how fake news is allegations of fake news is being used, alternative facts, all this is being used and promoted. And people are kind of dividing on either side of the aisle, so to speak, over these issues. But for middle schoolers, I don't think at this point they're able to understand the situation as we are, objectively pull back and look at it historically, and we can see what's going on. To them, it's kind of the way reality is, and that's what I'm concerned of.
One more question, a quick one.
Oh, okay, yeah. I thank you for your comment, your talk on scientific method. I've always thought scientific method is so critical. My dad was I would call him a hardcore scientist at KU Med Center, and I'm in the legal profession, and I've always been disappointed that the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't really care too much about the opinion of peer-reviewed data, particularly. I mean, they're going to decide what they feel like, it ought to be. Anyway, my question is, people often don't seem to understand scientific method and often don't seem to care. I mean, just people that we have casual discussions with, friendly, friends and so forth. And your opinion on how can we promote scientific method? I mean, how can we further people's understanding of its importance?
Well, you use the pronoun we, so there's a lot of variety there that we could touch on. Depends who you are, what your context in society is. I do it in my teaching, which is about 200 students a year, in some of my publications, and occasionally when I speak on related issues like this. So everyone needs to somehow bring it into their own social circle. And I know, if you don't get along very well with your neighbor, the last thing you want to do is start talking about death and taxes and God. But whatever the situation may be, talk about science, whatever your context is. Thanks.